The year was 1878, and Violet Maloney had been falsely accused of a crime she didn't commit, stealing from the general store, owned by the most powerful man in Palisade, Colorado. As she stood bound to the wooden post in the town square beneath the scorching summer sun, she wondered if death might be kinder than the public humiliation they forced upon her. Sweat trickled down her face as townsfolk spat harsh words and occasionally something more tangible. 3 days she'd been there with minimal water and no food. Her wrists were raw from the rough rope, her fair skin burned and blistered from exposure. Violet's once vibrant auburn hair hung in dirty tangles around her face, obscuring the striking green eyes that had caught many a suitor's attention when she'd first arrived in town 6 months ago. "Thief," someone shouted from the growing crowd. "Harlot." Called another, though she had rebuffed every unwanted advance. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. She had refused the advances of Stanley Blackwell, the store owner and de facto leader of Palisade. His bruised ego had led to this public spectacle, a warning to any woman who might deny him in the future. The sheriff, firmly in Blackwell's pocket, had carried out the punishment without trial or evidence. "Please," she whispered, her cracked lips barely able to form the word. No one stepped forward. No one dared challenge Blackwell's authority until he rode into town. The stranger's arrival drew little attention at first. Just another dusty traveler on a magnificent chestnut stallion, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. He dismounted outside the saloon, tying his horse to the hitching post before turning to survey the scene in the square. Quentin O'Malley had been riding for 3 weeks, making his way from Wyoming territory after selling the last of his cattle. At 32, he'd seen enough of humanity's cruelty to know when something wasn't right. The crowd parted unconsciously as he strode forward, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. At 6'3", with shoulders broadened from years of hard work, he cut an imposing figure. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying across the now quieting square. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "None of your concern, stranger, move along." Quentin ignored him, instead walking directly to the woman tied to the post. He knelt down, gently lifting her chin with one hand while offering his canteen with the other. "What's your crime, miss?" he asked quietly. Violet's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on the face before her. "I refused a man who doesn't understand the meaning of no," she whispered hoarsely after taking a sip of water. "That's so." Quentin stood to his full height, turning to face the sheriff and the watching crowd. "Since when is a woman's choice a crime in Colorado territory?" "She's a thief," Blackwell pushed through the onlookers. "Caught her stealing from my store. 3 days in the sun is just the beginning of her punishment." Quentin's ice-blue eyes assessed the well-dressed man. "You have proof of this theft?" "My word is proof enough in Palisade," Blackwell replied, chin jutting out defiantly. "Not for me," Quentin said simply. He drew a knife from his belt, causing several people to gasp and the sheriff to draw his gun halfway. With deliberate movements, Quentin cut the ropes binding Violet to the post. As she slumped forward, he caught her against his chest. "They all watched me suffer," she said, her voice barely audible to anyone but him. "For days, not one person helped." The cowboy lifted her gently, one arm supporting her back, the other under her knees. He turned to face the crowd, his expression hard as granite. "I don't know this woman, but I know injustice when I see it," he declared. "I'm taking her to the doctor and then we'll sort this matter out properly." "You can't do that," Sheriff Dalton protested, drawing his pistol fully now. Quentin's voice remained steady. "You willing to shoot an unarmed man carrying an injured woman, Sheriff? That the kind of law you uphold in Palisade?" The challenge hung in the air. The sheriff's hand trembled slightly, his eyes darting to Blackwell for direction. "Let him go," Blackwell finally said with a dismissive wave. "She's learned her lesson, but stranger, you'd best be moving on by sundown, both of you." Quentin said nothing as he carried Violet across the square to the doctor's office. The crowd parted silently, some looking away in shame, others watching with veiled interest. Few had ever dared stand up to Stanley Blackwell, Dr. Harrison Adams opened the door before Quentin even knocked, having witnessed the confrontation from his window. "Bring her in, quickly," the elderly doctor said, gesturing to an examination table in the back room. Quentin laid Violet down gently. "She needs water, food, and treatment for these burns and abrasions. And you need to leave town before Blackwell decides to make an example of you too," the doctor replied, already gathering supplies. "That man runs Palisade like his personal kingdom." "I don't scare easy, Doc," Quentin said, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "And I don't abandon folks in need." As the doctor tended to Violet, Quentin stood by the window, watching the crowd in the square disperse. He'd come to Palisade hoping to find a piece of land to start a ranch, tired of the constant moving that had defined his life since the war. Now, he found himself entangled in a stranger's troubles, yet something about the woman's quiet dignity in the face of such cruelty struck a chord within him. "She needs rest," Dr. Adams said after bandaging Violet's wrists. "But she can't stay here. Blackwell's men will come looking, and I can't afford to cross him openly." "I understand," Quentin nodded. "I've got a room at the hotel. She can recover there." "You're risking a lot for someone you don't know," the doctor observed, mixing a powder into a glass of water for Violet. "Maybe I'm tired of watching people suffer when I could do something about it," Quentin replied simply. Violet drank the medicine and drifted into a much-needed sleep. When she woke hours later, she found herself in an unfamiliar bed in a small hotel room. The cowboy who had rescued her sat in a chair by the door, cleaning a revolver. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice stronger but still rough from thirst. Quentin looked up, setting the gun aside. "Ainsworth Hotel. Best Palisade has to offer, though that's not saying much." "Why did you help me?" Violet struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in her sunburned skin. He crossed the room, helping her adjust the pillows before handing her a glass of water. "Would you believe me if I said I couldn't stand by and watch an innocent suffer?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "No one's that noble anymore." "Not nobility," he corrected her. "Just basic decency, something this town seems to have forgotten." Violet studied him carefully. In the lamplight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years in the sun, the small scar across his jawline, the calloused hands of a man who worked for his living. "I'm Violet Maloney," she offered finally. "I came to Palisade 6 months ago to work as a teacher." "Quentin O'Malley," he replied with a slight nod. "Cattle rancher, or I was until recently, looking to settle somewhere and start fresh." "Not here," Violet warned. "Blackwell owns half the businesses and influences the rest. The school board dismissed me 3 weeks ago because I refused his attentions." Quentin's jaw tightened. "And the theft accusation?" "A lie," she said firmly. "I went to his store to buy supplies with my last pay. He cornered me in the back, tried to force himself on me. I fought back, managed to scratch his face. The next day, the sheriff arrested me for stealing." "Your word against his," Quentin nodded in understanding. "And in Palisade, that's no contest." Violet sighed, leaning back against the pillows. "I should never have come here." "What brought you to Colorado?" "Dreams of independence," she replied with a rueful smile. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago in Boston. I was working as a governess, but the family's eldest son became inappropriate. I saw an advertisement for teachers in the West. It promised good pay, respect, opportunity. And delivered none of it," Quentin finished for her. "Not quite nothing," Violet's eyes met his. "It delivered you, apparently." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. "I'm no savior, Miss Maloney, just passing through at the right moment." "Or the wrong one, depending on how Blackwell decides to handle this," she pointed out. Quentin stood, moving back to the window where he could see the street below. "We'll leave at first light. I have a friend with a ranch near Denver. You can recover there while deciding your next move." "We." Violet raised an eyebrow. "You don't need to burden yourself with me." "It's no burden," he assured her. "I was heading that way anyhow." This wasn't entirely true, but Quentin knew Blackwell wasn't the type to let perceived insults slide. The woman wouldn't be safe traveling alone, and something about her quiet strength compelled him to offer protection. "Thank you," Violet said softly. "I don't have much money, but I can pay you once I find work again." "Keep your money," Quentin replied. "Just rest now. Tomorrow will be a long day." As Violet drifted back to sleep, Quentin contemplated their situation. He'd been drifting for years, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. After losing his family farm in Texas during the war, he'd worked cattle drives, prospected for gold, and even served briefly as a deputy in Arizona Territory. Nothing had felt like home. Now, a chance encounter with a woman in trouble had him making plans and promises. It was unlike him, yet it felt right somehow. His contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Hand moving instinctively to his holstered pistol, Quentin approached cautiously. "Who is it?" he called. "Dr. Adams," came the reply. "I've brought medicine and food." Quentin opened the door slightly, confirming it was indeed the doctor before letting him in. The elderly physician carried a basket covered with a cloth. "Mrs. Hollister from the cafe sent this," he explained, setting the basket on a small table. "She felt ashamed for not speaking up earlier. Many in town do, but Blackwell's influence. Fear is a powerful motivator," Quentin acknowledged, checking the basket's contents: bread, cold chicken, apples, and a small jar of honey. "Indeed." The doctor glanced at Violet's sleeping form. "How is she?" "Stronger than she looks," Quentin replied. "She'll recover." Dr. Adams handed over a small bottle. "For the pain and to help her sleep, 2 drops in water no more than twice a day." "Thank you, Doc." The doctor hesitated at the door. "Blackwell's been asking questions at the saloon. Offering money for information about you. I'd suggest leaving as early as possible tomorrow." "Noted," Quentin said grimly. "We'll be gone before sunrise." After the doctor left, Quentin checked his weapons and packed his few belongings. He'd need to acquire supplies and a horse for Violet before they departed. Settling back in the chair, he prepared for a night of watchful waiting. Dawn was just a promise on the horizon when Quentin gently woke Violet. She stirred slowly, the medicine still dulling her senses. "It's time," he whispered. "Can you stand?" With his assistance, Violet rose shakily to her feet. Quentin had procured a simple dress and coat to replace her tattered clothing, plus a wide-brimmed hat to protect her burned skin from further sun exposure. "I bought these from the hotel owner's wife," he explained as she examined the garments. "Not much, but better than what you had." "Thank you," Violet said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. Quentin stepped outside to give her privacy to change. When she emerged a few minutes later, she moved with more confidence despite her lingering weakness. "I bought a horse," Quentin informed her as they made their way down the back stairs of the hotel. "Nothing fancy, but gentle enough. If riding is too painful, you can ride in the supply wagon for the first day." "I can ride," Violet assured him. "I grew up around horses in Massachusetts." In the pre-dawn gloom, they made their way to the livery stable where Quentin had arranged to have the horses ready. The stable boy, no more than 16, waited nervously with 2 saddled horses and a pack horse carrying supplies. "Mr. Blackwell's men were asking about you last night," the boy whispered. "I didn't say nothing about you buying the mare." "Good lad," Quentin pressed a coin into the boy's hand. "If anyone asks, we headed south toward New Mexico." "Yes, sir," the boy nodded eagerly. Quentin helped Violet mount the dappled gray mare he'd purchased for her, noting her grimace of pain as she settled into the saddle. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "But we need distance between us and Palisade by full daylight." They rode north out of town, keeping to lesser-used trails rather than the main road. Quentin's experience as a tracker proved valuable as he chose paths that would be difficult to follow. By mid-morning they had covered nearly 10 miles, and there was no sign of pursuit. "We can rest here," Quentin said as they reached a small creek. "Water the horses and have something to eat." Violet dismounted carefully, her muscles stiff and sore. 3 days tied to a post followed by a morning on horseback had taken its toll, but she refused to complain. This man had risked his safety for her. The least she could do was maintain her composure. As she splashed cool water on her face, Quentin prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The domesticity of the scene struck Violet as strangely comforting a brief respite from danger. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked as they ate. Quentin considered the question. "Not always. My father had a small farm in East Texas. After the war destroyed it, I tried my hand at various trades. Cattle seemed to suit me best." "And your family?" "Gone," he said simply. "Pa died defending the farm from raiders in '63. Ma followed a year later, consumption. No siblings." "I'm sorry," Violet offered sincerely. Quentin shrugged. "Been on my own a long time now. Came to prefer it that way." "Yet here you are, helping a stranger," she observed. A rare smile crossed his face. "Perhaps I'm reconsidering my solitary ways." The moment of connection was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Quentin was instantly alert, motioning for Violet to remain silent as he moved to higher ground to assess the threat. "3 riders," he reported when he returned. "Moving fast, following our trail. We need to go now." They packed quickly, erasing signs of their rest stop before mounting up. Quentin led them into a rocky area where tracking would be more difficult, but the detour cost them valuable time. By mid-afternoon, it was clear their pursuers were gaining ground. Violet's mare was tiring, unable to maintain the pace needed to stay ahead. "There's an abandoned mining cabin ahead," Quentin said after consulting his map. "We might be able to defend it if necessary." "I won't be the cause of your death," Violet protested. "Nobody's dying today," Quentin assured her with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The cabin appeared as they crested a small ridge, a simple one-room structure with walls of rough-hewn logs and a partially collapsed roof. Not ideal, but better than facing Blackwell's men in the open. Once inside, Quentin quickly assessed their defensive options. The cabin had 1 door, 2 windows, and enough furniture remains to create some barricades. He positioned Violet behind an overturned table and handed her his spare pistol. "Ever fired one of these?" he asked. "My father taught me," she replied, checking the cylinder with practiced ease. 6 shots. Quentin nodded approvingly. "Use them wisely if it comes to that. I'm going to try to talk them down first." "They won't listen," Violet warned. "Blackwell doesn't employ men known for their reasoning skills." "Then we make our stand here," Quentin said grimly. The riders approached cautiously, stopping just out of effective pistol range. 3 men, all wearing deputy badges that Quentin suspected were as fraudulent as their authority. "O'Malley," the leader called. "We know you're in there. Send out the woman and you can ride away." "Not happening, friend," Quentin replied from his position by the window. "Turn around and tell Blackwell you lost our trail." A bullet splintered the wood beside the window, answering his suggestion. "That's your only warning," the man shouted. "The woman's coming back to face justice, one way or another." "What justice is that?" Quentin challenged. "The kind where a man forces himself on a woman, then punishes her for refusing." The men conferred briefly before spreading out to surround the cabin. "They're going to rush us," Quentin told Violet, moving to cover both entrance points as best he could. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steadier than he expected. The first attack came minutes later, 2 men firing at the windows while the third tried to kick in the door. Quentin shot the man at the door in the shoulder, sending him scrambling back for cover. "Next one won't be so merciful," Quentin warned. A tense standoff followed, broken by occasional gunfire. As dusk approached, Quentin grew concerned. If they waited until dark, the advantage would shift to the attackers who could approach more stealthily. "We need to end this before nightfall," he told Violet. "I'm going to try something. Cover me." Before she could protest, Quentin moved to the back of the cabin where part of the roof had collapsed. Using fallen beams as a ladder, he climbed onto what remained of the roof and carefully made his way to the edge. From this vantage point, he could see one of the men hiding behind a boulder about 30 yards from the cabin. Taking careful aim, Quentin fired. The bullet struck the rock inches from the man's head, showering him with stone fragments. "That's your second warning," Quentin called. "The next one goes through your skull." The man fired wildly in Quentin's direction before running toward his horse. Quentin shifted position, now targeting the leader who was using a fallen tree as cover. "Your friend's leaving," Quentin informed him. "Smart man. What about you two?" A bullet whistled past Quentin's ear in reply. He ducked, then returned fire more deliberately. His shot caught the leader in the leg, eliciting a howl of pain. Inside the cabin, Violet heard movement at the remaining window. The third attacker was attempting to climb through while Quentin was occupied. Taking careful aim just as her father had taught her, she fired. The bullet grazed the man's arm, causing him to lose his grip and fall back outside with a curse. Violet quickly reloaded, remembering her father's words. "Always keep your cylinder full when possible." The wounded leader was calling for retreat now. Quentin watched from the roof as the three men mounted their horses and began riding away, the leader's curses fading into the distance. "They're gone," Quentin announced as he climbed back into the cabin. "But they'll be back with more men once they report to Blackwell." Violet nodded, setting down the pistol with shaking hands now that the immediate danger had passed. "You were right. Nobody died today." "Not for lack of trying on their part," Quentin observed dryly. "You handled yourself well." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being afraid doesn't matter," he said, checking their supplies. "What you do despite the fear, that's what counts." They spent the night in the cabin, taking turns keeping watch. Quentin insisted Violet take the first sleep shift, recognizing she needed recovery time more than he did. As she slept, Quentin studied her face in the moonlight filtering through the damaged roof. The fierce woman who had stood her ground against Blackwell, who had endured public humiliation rather than surrender her dignity, who had just helped fight off armed attackers, she slept with the peaceful expression of a child. Something protective stirred in his chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried beneath years of solitary wandering. When Violet woke to take her watch shift, she found Quentin adding entries to a small leather-bound journal. "I didn't take you for a writer," she observed. He closed the book somewhat self-consciously. "Just noting landmarks and distances. Useful for finding my way back someday." "Back to what?" she asked, genuinely curious. Quentin considered the question. "Don't rightly know yet, just seems important to keep track of where I've been." Violet settled beside the window for her watch. "Where are we heading tomorrow?" "There's a small settlement called Whispering Pines about 20 miles northeast. Friend of mine runs the trading post there. We can rest, resupply, and send word to my ranch friend near Denver." "How long until we reach Denver?" 4, maybe 5 days if we're cautious, Quentin estimated. "Longer if we need to avoid main trails." Violet nodded, her expression determined. "I'll keep up." "Never doubted it," he replied with a slight smile. They departed at first light, leaving no trace of their overnight stay. The day's journey took them through increasingly mountainous terrain, the aspens and pines providing welcome shade. Violet's strength was returning, though the physical and emotional toll of her ordeal remained evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. By late afternoon, they reached a high meadow filled with wildflowers. The beauty of it caused Violet to rein in her horse and simply stare. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Quentin nodded in agreement. "This is why I came west. Spaces so big they make a person's troubles seem smaller." "Does it work?" Violet asked, her eyes still taking in the vast landscape. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Other times, the emptiness just gives your thoughts more room to echo." They made camp near a small stream at the meadow's edge. As Quentin prepared a fire for their evening meal, Violet wandered along the water's edge, gathering a small bouquet of blue and purple wildflowers. "My mother would have loved this place," she said when she returned, arranging the flowers in an empty tin can. "She always said God speaks clearest through growing things." "Wise woman," Quentin commented as he stirred their supper of beans and salt pork. My ma said something similar about thunderstorms, said it was God rearranging the heavens. Is that why you're not afraid of anything? Violet asked, accepting the tin plate he offered. Because you see divinity in dangerous things. Quentin chuckled, a warm sound that surprised her with its genuineness. I'm afraid of plenty, Miss Maloney, just learn to hide it better than most. Violet, she corrected him. After what we've been through, formality seems unnecessary. Violet, he repeated, testing the name. It suits you. Strong, distinctive. My father chose it, she explained. Said I arrived in this world with eyes wide open and a determined expression, like a flower pushing through stone to reach the light. He described you perfectly, Quentin observed. A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate. Later, as stars appeared in the darkening sky, Violet found herself sharing more about her life in Boston, her education at a progressive women's seminary, her brief teaching career cut short by her parents' deaths, her decision to seek independence in the West. What about you? She asked. What made you choose ranching after the war? Quentin stretched his long legs toward the fire. Open spaces. After seeing so much death, so much destruction, I needed room to breathe. Cattle don't ask questions or expect answers, they just need tending. But you sold your herd, Violet recalled. Why? Time for something new, he said simply. Maybe a smaller spread, something I can manage without constantly moving, somewhere to build something lasting. A home, Violet nodded in understanding. Been a while since I had one of those, Quentin admitted. Not sure I remember how it works. I think, Violet said softly, it starts with having somewhere you want to return to at day's end. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Neither acknowledged it, but both felt the subtle shift in their relationship from reluctant traveling companions to something with the potential for more. The next morning brought low clouds and the threat of rain. They packed quickly and continued northeast, hoping to reach Whispering Pines before the weather worsened. Tell me about this friend of yours, Violet requested as they rode. Thomas Burke, Quentin replied. Fought together briefly during the war, though on different sides initially. He was Union, I was Confederate, at least until deserting after Vicksburg. Violet raised an eyebrow. You deserted? After watching my commanding officer order the execution of civilian families for suspected sympathies, Quentin explained grimly. Some causes aren't worth the cost. How did you and Thomas become friends after being enemies? He found me half-starved, making my way north. Could have turned me in as a deserter. Instead, he shared his rations and helped me find work as a teamster for the Union. Said any man who'd walk away from his side over a matter of conscience was worth knowing. The first raindrops began to fall as Quentin finished his story. Within minutes, the gentle shower became a downpour. They urged their horses to a trot, seeking shelter beneath a rocky overhang until the worst passed. Pressed together in the limited dry space, Violet became acutely aware of Quentin's physical presence, the warmth radiating from his body. The clean, masculine scent of him beneath the travel dust, the steady rhythm of his breathing. For his part, Quentin found himself noticing details he'd been too preoccupied to acknowledge before: the delicate curve of her jaw, the small scar near her right eyebrow, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks when she looked down. The rain slowed to a drizzle after an hour. They continued their journey through a landscape transformed by moisture, colors more vibrant, scents more pronounced. By late afternoon, the settlement of Whispering Pines came into view in a valley below. Unlike Palisade's rigid grid of streets, Whispering Pines had grown organically along a creek, with buildings nestled among the trees that gave the place its name. The trading post stood at the settlement center, a two-story structure with a wide porch and hitching rails out front. As they approached, a burly man with a magnificent red beard emerged from the building. "Quentin O'Malley, you son of a gun," he bellowed cheerfully. "Thought you were heading to Wyoming." "Change of plans, Thomas," Quentin replied as he dismounted. "This is Miss Violet Maloney." We're in need of your hospitality and discretion. Thomas Burke's expression grew serious as he noted Violet's still healing injuries. Trouble following you? Might be, Quentin acknowledged. Then you'd best come inside, Thomas said, helping Violet from her horse. My wife will be pleased to have another woman to talk to. She claims conversation with me is like trying to draw water from stone. Thomas's wife, Sarah, proved to be as warm and welcoming as her husband. She immediately took Violet under her wing, providing fresh clothing, a hot bath, and genuine compassion when Violet hesitantly explained her situation. Blackwell's reputation reaches even here, Sarah said as she brushed and braided Violet's hair that evening. Men like him believe ownership is the same as love. I never encouraged him, Violet felt compelled to clarify. Of course not, dear, Sarah patted her shoulder. Some men don't require encouragement, only opportunity, but enough about unpleasant matters. Tell me about your journey with Quentin. He's quite the handsome rescuer, isn't he? Violet blushed despite herself. He's been very kind, Sarah laughed softly. My dear, I've known Quentin O'Malley for 8 years. Kind isn't a word I'd use for him. Honorable, yes, stubborn as a mule, certainly. But the way he watches you when you're not looking, that's not mere kindness. You're imagining things, Violet insisted, though her heart quickened at the thought. If you say so, Sarah replied with a knowing smile. Now let's see about dinner. The men have had their heads together all afternoon, plotting your safe passage to Denver. Downstairs, Quentin and Thomas were indeed discussing routes and potential dangers. Blackwell's not the type to let this go, Thomas warned. His pride won't allow it. I know, Quentin agreed grimly. But once we reach Denver, his influence diminishes. My friend James has connections with the territorial governor. If necessary, we can seek official intervention. And then what? Thomas asked. What's your plan for the lady? Quentin hesitated. That's for her to decide. I promise to see her to safety, nothing more. Thomas studied his friend's face. You sure about that? Because I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her. Don't start, Burke, Quentin warned. Just making an observation, Thomas held up his hands in mock surrender. But consider this, you've been wandering since the war ended. 13 years is a long time to be rootless, even for a man like you. Before Quentin could respond, Sarah and Violet descended the stairs. Violet had been transformed by her bath and change of clothing. Wearing one of Sarah's dresses, her hair clean and neatly braided, the healthy color returning to her cheeks, she looked like a different woman from the one Quentin had rescued just days ago. He stood automatically as she entered, a gesture of respect his mother had ingrained in him long ago. You look. He searched for an appropriate word, restored. Violet smiled at his awkward compliment. I feel restored thanks to Mrs. Burke's kindness. Sarah, the older woman corrected, we don't stand on ceremony here. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Thomas sharing humorous stories about the settlement's founding and early mishaps. For the first time since her ordeal began, Violet laughed freely, the sound causing Quentin to glance at her with undisguised appreciation. After the meal, Thomas produced a bottle of good whiskey, and the conversation turned to more serious matters. I've sent word to 2 friends who run supply wagons between here and Denver, he informed them. They'll be passing through tomorrow, heading north with mining equipment. You can travel with them for added safety. That's very kind, Violet said sincerely. Not entirely altruistic, Thomas admitted. If Blackwell's men come looking, I can honestly say you've moved on with the supply train. No need to mention which direction. Speaking of directions, Sarah interjected, Violet mentioned she was a teacher. The settlement's been trying to establish a proper school, but we've had difficulty finding someone qualified who's willing to live this far from civilization. Violet's expression brightened at the mention of teaching. You need a teacher? Desperately, Sarah confirmed. We have 28 children between 6 and 16, currently learning whatever their parents can manage to teach. Most of the miners and trappers hereabouts are barely literate themselves. It's just something to consider, Thomas added quickly. No pressure. Denver offers more opportunities, certainly. And safer ones, Quentin pointed out. Blackwell could still cause trouble here. Violet nodded thoughtfully. It's a generous offer. I'll consider it carefully. Later, as Violet settled into the Burke's guest room, she found her thoughts conflicted. Teaching in Whispering Pines would provide the independence and purpose she sought. Yet Denver promised greater security from Blackwell's reach, and then there was Quentin. In Denver, they would part ways, he to his friend's ranch, she to whatever employment she could find. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss. She had known him less than a week, yet in that time they had shared dangers and confidences that created a bond unlike any she'd experienced before. His quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his occasional glimpses of gentle humor all had become dear to her with surprising speed. "Foolish heart," she whispered to herself. "He sees you as a responsibility, nothing more." In the room across the hall, Quentin was having similar thoughts. The prospect of reaching Denver no longer held the same appeal it had days ago. Then it had represented the next logical step in his journey. Now it meant saying goodbye to Violet. Thomas's words echoed in his mind. 13 years is a long time to be rootless, perhaps too long. For the first time since the war, Quentin found himself imagining a different kind of life, one with permanence, with connections, with someone to return to at day's end. Morning came with clear skies and the arrival of Thomas's friends with their supply wagons. Introductions were made, arrangements confirmed. By mid-morning, Violet and Quentin were ready to depart. "Thank you both for everything," Violet embraced Sarah warmly. "Remember, there's a place for you here if you want it," Sarah reminded her. "Either of you," she added with a meaningful glance at Quentin. Thomas pulled Quentin aside for a final word. "You're overthinking things as usual." Meaning some chances don't come along twice," Thomas said bluntly. "Don't let her slip away because you're afraid of putting down roots." Quentin acknowledged the advice with a nod, though he made no promises. The journey with the supply train proved uneventful but slow. The heavily laden wagons required frequent stops to rest the draft horses, stretching what would normally be a 3-day ride into 5. During this time, Quentin and Violet found numerous opportunities for conversation. They discussed books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they still harbored. Each discovery about the other deepened their connection. On the third night, camped beside a small lake, Violet found the courage to ask the question that had been forming in her mind. "What will you do after Denver?" she inquired as they sat watching the sunset reflect on the water's surface. Quentin was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. "I've been considering Thomas's offer," he finally said. "Whispering Pines needs a lawman. Thomas suggested I might fit the role." Violet tried to mask her surprise and the sudden hope that bloomed within her. "You'd stay there." "What about your plans for a ranch?" "Plans change," Quentin said simply. "Sometimes for the better." Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Quentin reached out to touch her cheek. Violet leaned into his hand, her eyes closing briefly at the gentle contact. "I find myself reluctant to say goodbye in Denver," he admitted softly. "As do I," Violet whispered. The moment was interrupted by one of the wagon drivers calling everyone to dinner. The conversation remained unfinished, but something had shifted between them, acknowledgement of possibilities neither had dared voice before. 2 days later, they crossed into the outskirts of Denver. The city sprawled before them, a stark contrast to the wilderness they'd traversed. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, the sounds of construction and commerce creating a constant background hum. "James's ranch is about 10 miles north of the city," Quentin informed Violet as they thanked the wagon drivers and prepared to continue on their own. "Is that where we're going next?" Violet asked, noting his use of we rather than assuming they would part ways. "If you're willing," Quentin replied. "It's a safe place to rest and consider your options." "Our options," Violet corrected gently. A rare full smile crossed Quentin's face. "Our options," he agreed. They rode north through the bustling city, eventually reaching more open country where ranches and farms spread across the landscape. James Peterson's Double P Ranch was marked by an elaborate wooden arch spanning the main entrance. A tall man with silver-streaked dark hair rode out to meet them as they approached. "Quentin O'Malley," he called. "About time you showed your face. Your letter arrived yesterday, almost beat you here." The men clasped hands warmly before Quentin introduced Violet. "Miss Maloney," James tipped his hat respectfully. "Any friend of Quentin's is welcome at the Double P, though I admit he's never brought a lady friend before." "It's a long story," Quentin said, "the best kind." James grinned. "My wife will be delighted to hear it. She's always claiming our life lacks romance." Eleanor Peterson proved to be as welcoming as her husband. After hearing an abbreviated version of their journey, she insisted Violet take the best guest room and provided a selection of dresses more suited to Denver's climate than Sarah Burke's borrowed garments. "James has business in the city tomorrow," she informed them over dinner. "You could accompany him, Violet, if you wish to explore employment opportunities." Violet glanced at Quentin before responding. "Actually, I may have an opportunity already. The settlement of Whispering Pines needs a teacher." "And Quentin is considering becoming their marshal," James observed shrewdly. "Interesting coincidence." Quentin cleared his throat. "Nothing's been decided." "Of course not," Eleanor said soothingly, though her eyes twinkled with the same knowing look Sarah had displayed. Later that evening, Quentin found Violet on the ranch house's wide veranda, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Beautiful night," he commented, joining her at the railing. "It is," she agreed. "James has a magnificent property here." "He's worked hard for it," Quentin nodded. "Started with nothing after the war, just like I did. Difference is he stayed in one place long enough to build something lasting." Violet turned to face him. "Is that what you want, something lasting?" "I'm beginning to think so," he admitted. "For years, I convinced myself I preferred freedom to stability. Now I wonder if I was just afraid of losing something I cared about again. And now," Quentin took a deep breath, "now I'm thinking some things are worth the risk of loss because the alternative, never having them at all, seems far worse." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I know we haven't known each other long, but sometimes life gives you clarity in unexpected moments. Like when a stranger cuts you free from a post in a town square," Violet suggested with a small smile. "Exactly like that," Quentin agreed. "I didn't know then that saving you would change my course so completely." "For the better, I hope," Violet whispered. "Without question," Quentin assured her. "Violet, I'm not asking for promises now. It's too soon and you've been through too much. But if you decide to take that teaching position in Whispering Pines, and if I accept Thomas's offer to become marshal there, then we would have time to discover if what's growing between us could become something lasting," Violet finished for him. "That's my hope," Quentin nodded. Violet stepped closer, her free hand resting lightly on his chest. "It's mine as well." Under the vast Colorado sky, their first kiss held the promise of possibilities neither had dared imagine before their paths crossed in Palisade. The next morning brought unexpected news. James returned from an early ride to town with a telegram that had arrived for Quentin. "It's from Thomas," he explained, handing over the paper. Quentin read it quickly, his expression darkening. "Blackwell sent men to Whispering Pines. They threatened Thomas, trying to learn our whereabouts." Violet paled. "Was anyone hurt?" "No," Quentin assured her. "The settlement's miners ran them off, but Thomas warns that Blackwell is offering a substantial reward for information about us. He's apparently been telling people you stole valuable items before fleeing." "That's absurd," Violet protested. "I had nothing when I left." "Blackwell doesn't care about truth," Quentin said grimly. "He cares about saving face and punishing those who defied him." James, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "This changes things. You can't return to Whispering Pines yet, not with Blackwell's men actively searching. And Denver may not be safe either if the reward is high enough to tempt information brokers." "What do you suggest?" Quentin asked. "Stay here for now," James offered. "The double P is large enough that your presence won't be obvious to casual observers. I have connections in the territorial government. Given time, we might be able to resolve this legally." "How long?" Violet asked. James shrugged. "Hard to say. Weeks, possibly months. The territorial courts move slowly." Quentin and Violet exchanged looks of resignation. Neither had anticipated this complication, but both recognized the wisdom in James's advice. "We accept your hospitality gratefully," Quentin said finally. "But I won't put your family at risk indefinitely. If there's no progress within a month, we'll need to consider alternatives." James nodded in understanding. "Fair enough. In the meantime, I could use an extra hand with the spring calving, and Alina mentioned she'd appreciate help organizing the schoolroom for the ranch children." And so began an unexpected interlude in their journey. The Double P Ranch became a sanctuary where both Quentin and Violet found purposeful work, while their future remained in limbo. For Violet, the opportunity to teach the dozen children of ranch workers proved deeply satisfying. Using the small schoolhouse James had built on the property, she established a proper educational routine that the children quickly embraced. Quentin, meanwhile, found himself reconnecting with skills he'd developed during his cattle-driving years. The physical labor of ranch work provided an outlet for his frustrations regarding their situation, while evening strategy sessions with James explored legal avenues to neutralize Blackwell's influence. Most importantly, the time allowed their relationship to develop naturally, without the pressure of immediate decisions or constant danger. They shared meals, walks along the ranch's borders, quiet conversations on the veranda each evening. Small moments of connection accumulated into something neither could deny was deepening into love. 3 weeks into their stay, Alina observed them walking together near the corral, Violet laughing at something Quentin had said, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Those two belong together," she commented to her husband. James nodded agreement. "Never thought I'd see the day Quentin O'Malley would look at anyone that way. He's been carrying ghosts too long." "She has her own ghosts," Alina pointed out, "but they seem to be healing each other." That evening, as they walked along the creek that bordered the ranch's eastern edge, Quentin took Violet's hand. "I received a letter today from Thomas," he informed her. "The teaching position in Whispering Pines is still available whenever circumstances allow us to return." "Us?" Violet questioned softly. Quentin stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Yes, us. If you'll have me, Violet, these weeks together have only confirmed what I began to feel on our journey. I love you. I want a future with you, whether in Whispering Pines or somewhere else entirely." Violet's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I love you too, Quentin, more than I thought possible in such a short time." He gathered her close, his kiss conveying the depth of feeling words couldn't fully express. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "Marry me," Quentin said simply. "Not someday, not when everything is settled. Now, here?" "Yes," Violet answered without hesitation, "though I have nothing to bring to our marriage but myself." "That's all I want," Quentin assured her. "Everything else will build together." They shared the news with James and Alina over dinner. The older couple's delighted response included immediate offers to arrange the ceremony at the ranch. "The circuit preacher visits next Sunday," Alina informed them excitedly. "Perfect timing." The week passed in a blur of preparations. Alina helped Violet alter one of her better dresses into a suitable wedding gown, while James took Quentin into Denver to purchase a proper ring. During this trip, James also brought news that offered hope for their larger situation. "I spoke with Judge Morrison," he informed Quentin as they rode back to the ranch. "He's agreed to look into Blackwell's activities. Apparently, there have been other complaints about his methods in Palisade, though most people have been too intimidated to make formal accusations." "That's encouraging," Quentin acknowledged. "But will it be enough to neutralize him?" "Perhaps," James said thoughtfully. The judge mentioned something interesting: Blackwell's land claims may not be entirely legitimate. If proven, that alone could diminish his influence significantly. Quentin considered this information. How long would such an investigation take? Months, most likely, James admitted. But knowing it's underway might provide enough security for you and Violet to consider your future plans. By the time Sunday arrived, bringing with it Reverend Michaels and his traveling chapel wagon, Quentin and Violet had made their decision. They would marry at the Double P, then return to Whispering Pines where both had positions waiting. James promised to keep them informed of any developments regarding Blackwell and to provide assistance if needed. The ceremony took place in the ranch's garden, now blooming with early summer flowers. Ranch hands and their families gathered to witness the unlikely union of the quiet, intense cowboy and the educated Eastern woman whose paths had crossed so dramatically. Violet wore a simple cream-colored dress, adorned with lace from Aliner's own wedding gown. Wildflowers formed her bouquet. Quentin, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his best shirt and newly purchased vest, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on James's arm. Dearly beloved, Reverend Michaels began the traditional service. As they exchanged vows and rings, both Quentin and Violet reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment, from a public humiliation in Palisades Town Square to the promise of a shared life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend concluded. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration that followed was joyous if modest, a feast prepared by Aliner and the ranch cook, music provided by a ranch hand's fiddle, dancing in the barn cleared for the occasion. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, Quentin led Violet away from the festivities toward the small cabin James had offered for their wedding night. "Happy?" he asked as they walked hand in hand. "Completely," Violet assured him. "Though I admit I never imagined my wedding would happen this way in this place." "Having regrets?" Quentin's voice held a hint of uncertainty. "Not one," Violet stopped to kiss him reassuringly. "Some paths choose us rather than the other way around. Ours began in terrible circumstances, but led to something beautiful." In the privacy of the cabin, illuminated only by lamplight and the fading glow of sunset, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Gentle exploration gave way to passion neither had known they were capable of feeling. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they spoke of their hopes for the future, the home they would build, the family they might create, the life they would share. "We should leave for Whispering Pines within the week," Quentin suggested. "The sooner we establish ourselves there, the better." Violet nodded against his chest. "I'm ready. A bit nervous, but ready. We'll face whatever comes together," he promised. 4 days later, they departed the Double P Ranch with the Petersons' blessing and practical gifts, a pair of good horses, supplies for the journey, and letters of introduction to the territorial officials in case of trouble. The trip to Whispering Pines took 3 days of steady riding. They traveled cautiously but without incident, arriving as summer reached its fullest expression in the mountain landscape. Thomas and Sarah Burke welcomed them with open arms, and the news that the settlement had appointed a town council in their absence with Thomas as mayor. "Official now, is it?" Quentin remarked as they settled in the Burke's parlor. "Had to get organized," Thomas explained. "Too many new folks arriving for the mines and timber operations. First order of business was appointing you marshal if you're still interested." "I am," Quentin confirmed. "And Violet still wants the teaching position if available." "More than available," Sarah assured them. "The children have been using the community hall as a temporary classroom, but the town's building a proper schoolhouse. Should be ready by the time school starts in September." "And we've prepared living quarters for you," Thomas added. "Nothing fancy but solid, 2-room cabin near the creek with space to expand if needed." "That's very generous," Violet said, touched by the community's thoughtfulness. "Self-interest, really," Thomas winked. We need good people to stay. Offering decent accommodations helps ensure that. The next morning, Quentin officially accepted the marshal's position in a brief ceremony at the community hall. By afternoon, he was hanging the marshal's star on the door of the small office that would serve as the settlement's first jail and law enforcement headquarters. Violet, meanwhile, examined the school materials available and began planning lessons for the diverse group of children she would soon teach. The community's enthusiasm for education was evident in the donations already gathered: books, slates, even a small bell to call students to class. That evening, they moved into their new home. The cabin was indeed small but well constructed, with a main room containing a stone fireplace and modest kitchen area, plus a bedroom with a handcrafted bed frame. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table and stocked the pantry with basic provisions. "Our first home," Violet said softly as they stood in the doorway. Quentin pulled her into his arms. "First of many moments we'll share here." They settled quickly into the rhythm of life in Whispering Pines. Quentin's duties as marshal proved mostly administrative at first, settling minor disputes, establishing basic rules for the growing settlement, occasionally escorting rowdy miners back to their camps after too much whiskey at the trading post. Violet threw herself into preparing for the school year, organizing materials and meeting with parents to understand their expectations. She also began offering reading lessons for adults in the evenings, which proved unexpectedly popular among the miners and lumbermen eager to improve their circumstances. As summer waned, they received a letter from James Peterson with promising news. The territorial judge had begun formal investigations into Stanley Blackwell's business practices. Preliminary findings suggested extensive fraud in his land acquisitions and possible bribery of local officials in Palisade. "It will take time," James wrote, "but the wheels of justice are turning. In the meantime, maintain caution, but know that Blackwell's attention is likely focused on his own legal troubles rather than pursuing personal vendettas." This reassurance allowed them to relax more fully into their new life. By the time autumn painted the surrounding mountains in brilliant colors, both felt genuinely at home in Whispering Pines. The schoolhouse was completed on schedule, a simple but sturdy building with large windows to capture natural light. On the first day of classes, 23 children of varying ages arrived, some having walked miles from outlying homesteads. Quentin took a brief break from his duties to watch from the doorway as Violet welcomed her students, the joy on her face as she introduced herself as Mrs. O'Malley filled him with pride and a deep sense of rightness about their shared path. As winter approached, bringing the first snowfall and longer evenings by the fire, Violet shared news that would change their lives again. "I'm with child," she told Quentin one night as they sat before the hearth. "Due in early summer, the doctor believes." Quentin's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in rapid succession. He gathered her into a gentle embrace, one hand coming to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "A family," he whispered. "Our family." The months that followed brought both anticipation and practical preparations. Quentin added a second bedroom to their cabin, working evenings and weekends to ensure completion before the baby's arrival. Violet continued teaching until late spring, when Sarah Burke took over her duties temporarily. Word from Denver came periodically through James's letters. Blackwell's legal troubles had indeed multiplied. Several of Palisade's citizens, emboldened by the territorial investigation, had come forward with their own complaints. The man's influence was waning, though the case remained unresolved. In June 1879, just as wildflowers again carpeted the meadows around Whispering Pines, Violet gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas James O'Malley. The entire settlement celebrated the first baby born to their marshal and teacher, with gifts ranging from handcrafted toys to a magnificent cradle made by the town's best carpenter. 6 weeks later, As Violet sat nursing their son on the cabin's front porch, a rider approached. Quentin, who had been splitting wood nearby, moved protectively toward his family until recognizing James Peterson. "Quite the domestic scene," James called as he dismounted. "Suits you, O'Malley." After greetings and introductions to young Thomas, James shared the news he had ridden personally to deliver. "It's finished," he announced. "Blackwell has been convicted of fraud, bribery, and witness intimidation. He's been sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. His assets have been seized, including most of his holdings in Palisade." "So it's over," Violet said, relief evident in her voice. "Completely," James confirmed. "You're free to live without looking over your shoulders." That evening, they hosted a small celebration with James, Thomas, and Sarah Burke, and a few close friends from the settlement. As glasses were raised in toast to justice and new beginnings, Quentin found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. Just over a year ago, he had been a solitary drifter with no fixed destination. Now he was a husband, a father, a respected member of a community. All because he couldn't ride past a woman suffering injustice in a town square. Later, after their guests departed and their son slept peacefully in his cradle, Quentin and Violet stood together on the porch, watching fireflies illuminate the summer darkness. "I never properly thanked you," Violet said softly. "For what?" Quentin asked, his arm around her waist. "For cutting me free that day, for promising me better days ahead." "I think you've thanked me thoroughly," Quentin replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day we spend together is thanks enough." Violet turned in his arms to face him. "When I was tied to that post, I thought I had lost everything: my dignity, my future, my faith in humanity. I couldn't imagine then what awaited me." "Neither could I," Quentin admitted. "I was just passing through, planning to continue wandering as I'd done for years. And now I'm exactly where I belong," he said with quiet certainty. "With you and Thomas in this place, building something that matters." As they sealed this acknowledgement with a kiss, both silently reflected on the truth they had discovered, that sometimes life's darkest moments can lead to its greatest blessings, and that love often appears when and where we least expect to find it. In the years that followed, Whispering Pines grew from settlement to proper town. Quentin and Violet welcomed 2 more children: a daughter, Eleanor Sarah, in 1881, and another son, William, in 1884. Their cabin expanded accordingly, eventually becoming one of the town's most established homes. Violet's school flourished under her guidance, eventually requiring additional teachers as the population increased. Quentin served as marshal for 12 years before being elected mayor when Thomas Burke retired. Their children grew strong and capable in the mountain community, each eventually finding their own paths while maintaining close family bonds. Sometimes, visitors to Whispering Pines would ask how the marshal and the schoolteacher had come to this remote mountain town. Quentin and Violet would exchange glances, sharing the private understanding of how their journey began. "We found each other when we needed it most," was all they would say. "The rest is our story." And what a story it was: one of rescue and redemption, of justice delayed but ultimately served, of love discovered amid adversity. A story that began with suffering witnessed by many, but transformed through courage, compassion, and the promise of better days into a life neither could have imagined alone.